really wanted to belong. So it was like, then when I went to secondary school and I saw like all the gangsters, the older gangsters, like doing their things and all of that kind of stuff, I was like, oh, that's the next thing. That's where I can belong. The more that you're yourself, the more that you show up with your hair in its full bloom, with your tattoos out, with the clothes that you like to wear, the more that you say the things that are really true for you, the more impact you have on the people that you work with. The trauma, the things I went through is kind of what got me to like base camp.
Jack, you're fresh off a flight from Ibiza, which I'm going to caveat is your home.
Indeed.
So it feels extra appreciative to have you here, fresh off a flight. So thank you for showing up.
Thank you for having me.
I don't know what airline you flew with, but I'm really happy that they weren't delayed.
It was British Airways, fortunately.
Oh, let's salute them.
If you fly with EasyJet or Ryanair in the summer, it's somewhat of a different experience.
That was so beautifully put. And also, I was very touch and go. I was like, his flight's going to be delayed. Like, we're not going to record on time.
No, God was on my side.
God was on your side.
Yeah.
You were early. You're flowing. So thanks. Thanks, universe. Also, nothing to do with that episode, but I flew Wizz Air the other day.
Yeah.
Second time I've flown with them. I just want to give them a shout out. They've been amazing, and it's such a budget airline. Sorry if I'm doing Wizz Air a really big disservice, but anyway, that's my fun fact. Flight was amazing.
Are you sponsored by Wizz Air?
No, but you never know. They might listen and they might want to sponsor. Don't know if it's a line, but that's okay. Okay, I feel that there are so many facets of you, who you are, that I really admire. I think there's commonalities between like what you do. So we're going to go with the flow with this episode. We're going to see how much can I weave in one episode. But let's start with you personally. How would you describe now, in the version of you in the stage that you're at, how would you describe the way that you communicate?
I would say balanced.
Oh, nice.
So for me, it's like with my communication, it's can I, depending on what the situation is, depending on how I'm feeling, can I dial up different elements and dial down different elements of my communication? So it's like that awareness of, oh, I need to be direct right now. Like that's what's needed. Oh, I need to really focus on listening right now. I need to be compassionate right now. So for me, how I would describe it as balanced is because what I'm trying to bring to the way that I communicate is like a conscious awareness of like, okay, I'm in this moment. Like, what's needed of me? How do I need to communicate? So without getting stuck in my head, I'm trying to kind of, I guess like reflect in real time how I should be communicating. And I feel like the more that I've focused on communicating from my heart rather than my head, then things just flow. And now it feels like, I still fuck shit up, obviously. Sometimes I'm like, fuck, why did I say that? But for me, it's like, can I communicate from the heart? Can I relax? Can I like be conscious of what I need to dial up in this moment for whatever it is that either I'm trying to achieve or maybe I'm holding space for someone else, one of my children going crazy or some shit like that.
Parenthood's a whole different ballgame. Okay?
Yeah.
I'm going to salute you first before we even go there. Fun facts that I feel is really useful to put in here. Sometimes people will say, but you're the communication expert, Mira. You should know. Or it somehow gets thrown back into my face. And I think that is a really important piece when you said, I still get things wrong. Like I still mess things up. And I want to just back you there that, as much as I sit and work in this space, like day in and day out, and I say for the most part, I'm good at it. But I'm human, and there are still either people, relationships, or conversations where I'm triggered. I have to shift and just be conscious of that. The thing that I think you described so beautifully is where you adapt. The fact you said that you try and do that in real time, how much work has that taken to get to that space?
Yeah, for me, the foundation of being able to do that is nervous system regulation, and it's being in my body. So it's like, if I'm in my, I get in my head sometimes as well, but it's like, if I get stuck in my head and I'm like overthinking and what am I trying to do and what's my agenda and all of that kind of stuff, then it's not gonna come out how I want it to. If I'm grounded and I'm breathing, and for me, I have ADHD, so like my natural disposition when I've got a good flow of energy is to move at like 150 miles per hour. Like that's been like the story of my life. But it's like through really doing the work on regulating my nervous system, I'm then able to move at a pace where I actually have that awareness in real time. And then sometimes it doesn't work. And the thing I was going to say, you said about not getting it right. The amazing thing about communicating is if you don't get it right, the only way you can make it right is by communicating again. So you're always going to get a second chance, right?
Oh, I love it. And we need that refreshing perspective as well. And I'm even I'll caveat this because I position it to my clients in this way as well. When you're communicating as well, which I feel you've really started the episode in such a beautiful way, is what's right as well in that situation. So the questions you shared in terms of like where you're focusing on adapting, like how am I showing up? Like what could I do a little bit more? I love when you say dial up. I probably overuse the word, but when am I dialing that up? What do I need to dial down? And it's not watering the version of you down, but being so aware to also get the best out of you in that situation and the relationships. So I feel like that's really important. And I always say to my clients, like, what's right for you in that situation and that relationship? Because different people require different things. And I'm going to vouch for, I'm pretty sure I said this to Laurie just before we started, is we usually have one or two people or relationships in our life that are really hard, no matter how much work you do. So how are you navigating that and what are you doing differently? Now, this mind and heart piece and regulating your nervous system feels so integral. And I think that sometimes in the beginning, when my clients work with me, they're expecting like super practical tips to make them a confident, better communicator in whatever area or relationship of their life. But we have to go below the surface.
Yeah, like, for real.
Okay, go Google your practical tips, because if you can't do the work underneath that, those practical tips aren't going to stick. So what did in your early days of regulating your nervous system look like for somebody that's like, oh, I've got no idea what you guys are talking about?
Yeah, for me, the first piece was really like understanding like my system, right? So like I said, like one of the things I had to realize over time, I mean, it wasn't that hard to realize because of the things that were happening in my life, but like I'm always moving at 150 miles per hour. So if I understand that that's like the natural way that my system works and that I'm an extrovert and I get energy off others, then it's like, okay, well, if I go down to like 80 or 100 miles per hour, that's already going to be so fast and it's actually going to be like a much better pace, right? So like that's an example of something that I had to learn about myself. Also just like learning and understanding like when am I in my body versus when am I in my head, right? And one of the big signs for me is like, am I breathing and where am I breathing from? So if I'm like communicating, I'm like well, it's like I'm probably not regulated and I'm probably not going to be able to communicate in the best way. If I'm breathing through my nose and it's like long deep breaths, then it's like I know that I'm like, so it's starting to like understand your system, which will have its own unique things, and then understanding what helps you regulate. So for me, like the simplest thing of just like the way I breathe and just like like even here when I was out walking here, or like when I get off the flight and like everyone's like wanting to get home because they're all hungover and they've been to Ibiza and and then like everyone's pushing my bags and all of that, and I'm like, okay, I'm not kind of used to this, like the busyness of the city and stuff like that. So it's like, you know, I got here and I went and sat down and I was just like, okay, just need to like breathe and just like arrive for a little bit because I'm coming to have a conversation with you, or I've got to go pick up one of my kids and I'm doing something with them, right? So it's like understanding your system and understanding what works for it. But for me, really getting in the body is like, yeah, your breath is like, for me, like one of the most foundational things. So like all the clients that I work with, which is quite funny because sometimes I'll work with like a CEO who's like, I want to get into business, you know, like I've got this problem, I want to make this money, and I'm like, okay, slow down, bro. Let's just take some time. Let's breathe. Let's arrive. And then we can communicate from a place that's like more authentic. And really the word for me is like, when you do this nervous system regulation piece, it's like the intentionality. So in summary, it's like learn your system, like what reflections and observations do you have about how you show up and how you manage your energy, what things stress you out, what things don't. And then find those tools. But for me, it's like, I always just say like, am I breathing? And like 9 times out of 10, I'm like, oh, okay, that's kind of thing. Like, how can I come back? And then there's another piece as well of like, sometimes things are going to be uncomfortable. So like one of the big things for me was like, how can I, in a healthy way, not in a dangerous way, put myself in situations that are challenging? And that's expanded my nervous system capacity in a way that then like, if a conversation is stressful, or if it's like I'm walking on the street and someone was to confront me, or I'm feeling really emotional and triggered about something, it's like I'm not going to push it away, I'm not going to avoid it, I'm just going to stay in the discomfort of it, right? So that's like one of the most, I think, practical things that you can do.
Love both of those. I'm picking up on the last point first, no particular reason. I think as well, there's such that fine line between putting yourself in that challenging situation in order to expand and know that you can deal with that. And I always say as well, doing it in a way where you start small, because it's not shock your system. Okay, can we stop trying to go from 0 to 100? I love your client example where you're like, I'll have a CEO, and yeah, you're in that environment, or let's say as a CEO, and a lot of my beautiful listeners and community are high achievers, so I feel they're going to resonate with this piece as well. But it is then, okay, slowing down, like let's actually look at the other pieces of the puzzle. So going back to the challenging piece as well, like uncomfortable conversations, feeling a little bit triggered. Personal share for me, the other day I got triggered about something because I'm still human, but the way that I deal with it now versus 10 years ago, I still look at those moments, I'm like, I'm goddamn proud of myself, because it is, when you say you can sit in the uncomfortableness, you can feel those feelings, you can feel triggered or feel stressed, and either learn how not to react and actually understand what's going on for you first of all, and then what's a healthy way of you communicating.
So that's the important part. You said what's going on for you, right? So it's like, what's going on for me? So for me, it's like ownership, or as sometimes I say, own your shit, right? So it's like, if you're getting triggered, that's your responsibility. There's a lot of this kind of thing of like, you're triggering me. Do you know what I mean? It's like, if you're feeling triggered in a situation, that is because there's some other pattern, memory, emotions, whatever it is, that's activating something in you, right? And I'm not saying this is easy, because it's, sometimes it feels blurry and I'm like, no, this person's being a fucking dick. And I'm also triggered. So like thingy, but it's like, I always say, can you like own your shit? Can you take ownership and be like, okay, well, what is, I actually prefer what questions to why when I'm introspecting. I think they're more objective and moving forward. Sometimes if I ask why, I'm like, why? What is going on? And I get all existential, but it's like, what is coming up for me? Where might this have come from? Okay, like, how do I want to move forward in this situation? And also, what do I need? So if I'm feeling triggered, it's like, do I need space? Okay, do I need to like actually just really go and have this conversation? Do I need to be like, hey, like, I don't feel we can sort this out now, but like, can we just connect for a second through the eyes, or can I give you a hug? So it's like, the ownership is important for me.
Two things there. I feel like I'm going to ad lib on everything you say and basically reiterate everything you're going to say in our episode. In terms of, I'm going to come back to the empowering questions because it's such an important piece. I love when you say, yeah, it's not about you triggered me. This week has been a week. It's been a beautiful, insightful, like a week filled with so many good things this week, but I've just felt the power. Anyway, point of this story is I've happened to either bump into or speak to a lot of like my previous clients, and just so many of them have walked through like in passing in some way, shape or form this week. So it's been like one of those weeks where I'm like, wow, I love my clients. They know this, right? Past, previous, current, love them all. But one of them as well got into the space where he was telling me, and he came up with, oh, so-and-so triggered me, and managed to catch himself and reframe it because he knows better by now. But it is that thing of like, it's probably one of the most common things I hear. He or she made me feel X, like they triggered me, and it removes that sense of like responsibility. For me, I think my thing when I look at actually what do I need or what's going on for me is, in the past, previous version of me would get so defensive because it felt like I was being critiqued. And actually then that felt like I wasn't showing up as the perfect version I wanted to be. And you and I literally talked about that before we even pressed record. So I love that. Other thing I really, really want to pull out, because I think this is such a like practical point that's so helpful, especially when people are like, where do I start? When you said about the self-inquiry questions, that was a tongue twister, and asking the what questions, because otherwise those why questions. And the thing around why questions is they really tap into your subconscious. So when we're asking why in a negative way, is such a disempowering like messaging back to our subconscious, which is just reinforcing the limiting beliefs of like, why can't I do this? Like, well, I'm not good enough. And
well, the story, when you say why, what happens is like the mind will start to tell the story. So it's like, why didn't I get the promotion? Oh, it's because that person's better than me and I'm not good enough. And that presentation, I was shaky, it was shit. Da, 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 da. And then the mind just starts going.
Yeah.
Whereas like with the what, it's like you can be objective. So I always say to people, it's like, okay, like, what could I have done differently? What was it that I wasn't quite strong enough on this time? What was the feedback that I got? What am I learning about myself? What are the feelings that are coming up about this? And then it's like, but. And then you're like, you look at all of that and you're like, oh, okay. Like, I can see a way to move forward. And like, obviously, sometimes with the why, tapping into that subconscious is also powerful. But it's like, I always know when I need to go to what questions, because something feels like sludgy. If I'm kind of like, oh, what's going on? Like, I don't know, am I doing the right thing? You know, that kind of feeling where I'm just like, and then I'm like, okay, cool. Like, what are the what's that I need to know right now? And then from there, it's like, I'm not guaranteed to have the answers, but at least it gives me something to be like, okay, do I want to take this route or do I want to take that route? Do you call them power questions, did you say?
So when it comes to why questions, I really agree with you, by the way. And I want to reinforce the point that what I'm about to say is a slightly different point.
Yeah.
So yes to the what questions, I think beautiful. And guys, if you need to, pause the episode, rewind and write those down. Okay. But I think as well, that's really helpful, because when you're stuck and you're in something, that pause, you can be like, oh God, now what do I do? So having those questions, especially if like you're just starting out in this area, is so incredibly helpful. A tool then to kind of take that a step further. So I always say it's the difference. You can use why, but not in that situation. I agree. I think it's like the next tool along, if I was going to make it in a logical way. Use why, but you have to use it in a way where it empowers you, because usually we ask those why questions in such a disempowering, why didn't I get a promotion? Like, why did I get ghosted? Painful experience. So ask the why questions, but why am I capable of nailing this presentation? Why, when I stand up, am I the expert in the room?
Oh, I like that.
Right?
I like that.
And it's a tool that I think is probably one of the most, I don't like putting that amount of emphasis on anything, because I usually say when all of us are healing or growing, it's your combination of your tools and you just understand what tools you need in what situation. But that is a tool that I think I see work so well with my clients, and it's a different way. And so subconsciously, whether you want to answer that consciously or not, subconsciously, your brain has to go and find the evidence. Like it has to. So when you say, why am I capable of standing up on stage and speaking to this room of people? Why am I? Oh, I've got X amount of experience behind me. I work with this amount of people. Oh, I've been 10 years in my industry. Yeah, actually, I do know what I'm talking about. And it completely starts to shift, especially when you talk as well about that difference between being in your body and your mind, when your mind can massively take over. So sorry, I actually ad-libbed there.
I like
massively.
I like it. I feel like we need to make a cheat sheet now.
We can do that. So listening to you is such a beautiful, powerful thing right now, because, not to state the obvious, but as a guy sitting here, you feel, for me, really in your power, able to be able to like have the reflection, the wisdom, and sit here and reflect and talk quite openly. Now, I feel like it is quite a hot topic at the moment in terms of how men communicate as well. Before we get into that, tell me what like the younger version of you actually was like maybe 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah. So, I mean, 10 or 15 years ago, I was a little bit of a mess. Yeah, so I guess I'll kind of go back to the very beginning. So grew up single mum family in London, which is why it's nice to be back in London, but also like intense at the same time. My dad wasn't around. He was a drug addict. And yeah, I kind of grew up, and I feel like my mum, because she's a superhero, did this like amazing job of like seeming like everything was sort of okay. Obviously, like not everything was okay. And the thing that growing up in that way gave me was this like, and it's why I'm here now, this like constant curiosity to like explore, especially like, what does it mean to be a man? Because my dad, to me, I never really hardly ever saw him because he was, you know, fucked up, was like this like mythical, the whole thing of like having a dad. What does it mean to be a man? And kind of that curiosity then, as I went into my teenage years, like I'd already been having quite a lot of behavioral issues at school, which I wouldn't call them behavioral issues. I'd say the school system wasn't the right structure for me. It wasn't supportive for me. And yeah, just like not knowing my system, that impulsivity. Also, I really wanted to belong. So it was like, then when I went to secondary school and I saw like all the gangsters, the older gangsters, like doing their things and all of that kind of stuff, I was like, oh, that's the next thing. That's where I can belong. So yeah, you know, 10, 15 years ago, I was definitely for my age, just kind of living on the edge. And I was constantly looking for that impulsivity. And really what I was doing was playing out a lot of this trauma that I'd experienced, or this trauma that I was feeling from an absent father, trying to work out what it meant to be a man. And, you know, just getting involved in violence, drugs, you know, to a point where definitely as I got to like, it must have been about 17 years old, I was like on the edge, you know, it's like really bad shit was happening, dangerous things were happening. And it's crazy because that was like the pivot, that moment, which I can talk about as well, where I like ended up going into like the corporate world. And I was like so rough around the edges. Like someone just gave me a shot and was like, let's just hire this like street rat, basically, was kind of what it was like. So yeah, things were very, very different. But what all of these learnings, these experiences gave me, and that curiosity was really a curiosity to work on myself. But for me, it was like I had to go to like the very bottom of the barrel. And it was like, if I think about like my getting to my early 20s and starting to work and having a career, it was like I'd hit the bottom of that barrel, but then it was like even 3-4 years ago, I hit another bottom of the barrel. So for me, it's like from going to those places and really exploring myself and healing myself and being curious, it's really what's allowed me to do the work that I'm doing. But I was a very different person. And I think the thing that's important to say about it is the way that I relate to that person has really changed. Because the way that I used to relate to it, even like maybe 6-7 years ago, would be like, oh, you know, life was tough. I had to do stuff and we didn't have money and da da da. And I used to relate to it in that way. Yeah. But that's still a victim mentality that I was kind of in, and also just like holding on to having a chip on my shoulder. Whereas the reason when you reflect to me and you're like, oh, I feel like you're in your power with what you're doing, it's because I don't have a chip on my shoulder. It's like, that was the life that I was given to be here, to be what I'm doing now. And that's the relationship I have with it. I have a relationship of like reverence for the learnings that I had and what I had to go through, not like it was so hard on me and da 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 da. So it's like, yeah, I guess for me, it's like, it's really changed how I relate to that like 15 to 20-year-old Jack. I love him, obviously.
You have to love that version, right? To appreciate this version. And it feels that when you talk about letting go of how you used to identify with that version of you as well, you describe it as a chip on your shoulder. I'd even describe it as like that story and that narrative that at the time you held on to, because in some ways it feels like that self-protection where you can explain and justify like, oh, it was so hard, like we didn't have money, like, so I had to do this. And sometimes I think that we forget, and I'm relating to this because I can massively identify in my life where I've done something essentially like the same concept, where I held on to a story for so incredibly long. And I was like, oh, wait, like we can rewrite this, like we can do this differently.
Yeah, well, the thing is with that story, every narrative that you have about yourself from your past serves a purpose. So when I got the chance, I got an apprenticeship in recruitment that I was, you know, I basically like ended up getting an £150 a month job at a recruitment company, and arrived. I had no idea what recruitment was. I was wearing a shit M&S secondhand suit. I had bare gel in my hair. I was like rock hard. And I walked in there and they're like, here's a phone, here's a database, like you're going to be a recruiter. And that chip on my shoulder was a tough environment, you know, like hardcore kind of boiler room environment. It made me work so fucking hard because I knew I wanted to make something of myself. I wanted to prove all the people wrong when I'd got kicked out of school and they said I was a piece of shit. And, you know, I wanted to be able to like provide for myself. And I had fear, like being poor is like scary, you know.
Hell
like
yeah.
If your mum's there struggling, like she only got like £20 to feed you for 2 weeks, it's like, you know, like now that I understand what she went through as well, so that chip on my shoulder made me incredibly successful. But then if I look like maybe about 5 years back, when I was still working in tech companies as a leader, and then it was just before I went into like full entrepreneurship, it was like that chip wasn't serving me anymore because I was making money, I was successful, I had skills, and operating from that place where I still had a chip on my shoulder meant that I was like in scarcity, or like I wasn't able to be as compassionate as I'd like to be, or whatever. So it was like, you know, that story pulled me out of a hole. But once I got out that hole, I didn't need to be in that story anymore. So that's the time when it's like, okay, what's the new story? How are you going to change your relationship with your past, with your history? Because that's really what then becomes like your superpower, you know, to really be in your authentic self.
I just want that point to just land. I don't even want to add anything. So we're going to come on in a second to a little bit more in terms of like that pivot and into that corporate world and that career and how you worked for some pretty amazing companies. But there's, I guess, a piece before that as well. You also reminded me of a quote, actually, that one of my friends sent me the other day. I think she was listening to, she had read Jay-Z's book or listened to a documentary. She's like, I can't believe I'm sharing this quote with you. But
I'm here for a Jay-Z quote.
that's what I thought. I thought you might appreciate it. And it just reminds me of when you're talking about the story and when it served you. And that's amazing. But understanding then when it no longer serves you and then rewriting it. And his quote was, people say I changed. I didn't work this hard to stay the same. And I'm like, yes, like we need that one, because it goes back to then that story and rewriting it and knowing when to let it go, and that you're working this hard or putting the inner work in whatever it is that you're doing right now to change, and that's okay. And we see it sometimes as such a bad thing. So just added there because I want to like reroute.
Yeah, and often the trauma is like, the way I describe it is like the trauma, the things I went through is kind of what got me to like base camp. You know, I felt like I was coming from a place where it was like I was really, you know, struggling, or I was always trying to like, pull myself out of this hole and feel safe and feel secure and feel like I belonged. But like none of the money or any of the businesses or whatever, that wasn't what it was about. But it was like, once you get to that base camp, it's like, is this story serving me? You know, and then it's like, okay, well, what am I stepping into? What feels like real for me? So the story is powerful. It serves a purpose, but it's like, we're humans, we evolve, we age, we change. So it's like, keep up with the story. Like, when does the story need to change?
Yeah, I love it. And like, for me, mine was like being the underdog. And
yeah, I resonate with that.
All right. And it was my superpower because it allowed me to thrive in what I do or did. Let's put it past tense because it doesn't really relate now. And then it was understanding when I got to base camp, and to understand you got so used to playing the role of an underdog. You don't know how to not be an underdog. And you don't realize that like you don't need to be an underdog anymore. So actually like you can let that part go and you can rewrite that because you're at base camp. By the way, I just really want to say I love the analogy of like, you're here, you're at base camp. So I'm fully taking that.
Yeah,
okay?
and this like life is Everest, right? How many camps are there for Everest? I don't know, but that's what it's like, right? And it's like there's levels to this shit. So it's like there's levels, right? And it's like, you know, that was like base camp for me, and it's like now I'm just like, I'm not shackling myself down. Like, in fact, I'm like, where I can, releasing myself from these identities that I don't need. And it's like, I'm just being like whatever is present in that moment, and being aware of like, how can I optimize this vessel? How can I be of service more? How can I do more? How can I provide more? How can I contribute more? And then from there, it's like everything just kind of opens up, you know?
It's honestly so powerful to hear you as a man sit here and like be able to share this openly. And we'll get into what you do now because it makes so much sense in terms of how you serve the men that you work with in this space. And I feel that you give a hell of a lot of light in this space. But something you said in terms of like taking it back to 17-year-old you, before that pivot happened, and you're like, that was one of the points that's like bottom of the barrel. What did bottom of the barrel look like then as 17-year-old Jack?
Yeah, like I was, if it was like, if I reflect it even with like the lens of communication, I was such a manipulator. I've always had, like, said humbly, what people would say like the gift of the gab. I was like a very, you know, out there child, extrovert, talking. My mum always called me the chameleon because I could like be chilling with like I could just be with any culture, anything, and I always felt like I could communicate, you know. But really, from that age of like, I would say like 12 years old, and then, you know, it continued, but I'd say like peaking at like 17, 18, it was like I was just a manipulator. I was like using that skill, that God-given gift that now I use for like such a positive influence on people's lives, constantly manipulating women, constantly just like manipulating to get what I wanted, snaking people, whether it was money, whether it was business, whatever it was. So it was just, I was really manipulating. And the thing was, like, the more and more that I did that in all areas of my life, it was like a rotten apple. Like, I was becoming so sour inside. Like, during all of that time, I had a terrible temper, Like my temper was so, like, it was bad. Like, and what it was just like unprocessed rage, right? It was just like pure unprocessed rage. How did I deal with that rage? I just smoked so much weed, which was then just like, oh, brush it under the carpet, just get high, keep doing what you're doing, you know, follow with like the kind of crowd that you're in, all of that kind of stuff. And I just repressed and repressed and repressed and repressed. And I mean, trying to think of like a specific, you know, one that comes out to me was like, and this was actually a little bit later on, but the context is like, I then got into the world of work. And although I wasn't being as active in that kind of stuff, I was still manipulating though. I wasn't processing or doing any work on myself. And I one day had a mental breakdown at work. So I remember sitting at work and it was like, I'd been doing some shit, like, again, like women related, you know, I was like kind of toeing the line with some stuff. I still had all this stuff going on that was like weighing heavy on me. And I was sitting at work and I like started to have a panic attack. And the panic attack led me to start like touching my body. And I was like, oh, I feel like something's wrong with me. I feel like I'm sick. I'm going to just say it, you know, it's vulnerable. Like one of my testicles had swelled up. So then I started Googling that in the office in this panic attack. Yeah. And I was like, I've got fucking cancer. So I ran out the office without telling anyone. And then I ended up like, I couldn't breathe for 3 days. I went to hospital. I thought I was dying. I was having all of these tests. And basically I had so much stress and trauma in my body, you know, that had just kind of masked over. And then I'd gone into the world of work and just worked every night and going out drinking and all of that. I'd never dealt with any of the stuff that was going on. And I basically just had like a mental snapping. Like I just completely snapped. And, they said that my testicle had swelled up because of how, like, because of it was like a physical symptom of the body. Yeah. So that for me was one of the lowest moments. And even till now, I've managed to, I know how to navigate it now, but I've lived the last 10 years with like severe health anxiety. So it's like, what would happen is every year or so, maybe a few times every year, I'd have like this thing come on and I'd basically be feeling like I was dying. So it was like, for me, that mental break, I can't remember how old I was, I must have been like 19 or 20. Yeah. That was like a real, even though I'd made that transition and I had a good job, it was such a dark moment because it was the moment that I realized like how much I was actually holding in my body. And it was like, sent me to a place where I was like, I don't know if I want to be here. Like, this is so difficult to just even function. And it had long lasting effects, but it's like, yeah, learning to then live with that. And now it's like, I'm like able to go through it. If those thoughts and feelings come up, then I'm like, okay, what's actually going on, and inquiring with myself. I went on a bit of a tangent there, but
that's why I love a tangent. Okay, so we're very here for it. I want to say thank you because I never take these moments lightly at all, and we love a good old gab or mate because we know that trauma has to come out in our body some way, shape or form. And I know you and I said this before, like we hit record, like someone needs to hear someone else say something before like it gives full permission. You said this to me actually, not the other way around. For somebody else to know like it's okay. And yeah, that's vulnerable. But if we can't say it, it's the whole entire reason I created the podcast. Like, yeah. It's called Open Up for a reason. It doesn't mean that everyone wants to like sit in that space, but that's powerful. One, for somebody to connect a dot to say, okay, you can hold on to the trauma and the stress in your body for a certain amount of time. At some point, that's going to come out.
It's going
to take over.
Yeah, with health anxiety, it's a weird one as well because people are kind of like, what are you talking about? Like, I remember when it happened and I like couldn't breathe for 3 days. Yeah. It's like proper fucked up. And I remember like 2 or 3 of my friends at the time came over, and like no shade on them. They were just, you know, like late teenagers doing their thing, chilling, whatever. Like, are you cool, bro? Like, what's going on? You bless. Yeah. And it was like, they were like, oh man, you're fine. You know, like you're just thinking this crazy stuff. And it's like, it's definitely, yeah, like, I would say the health anxiety was quite like an insidious one because of that, because it's people, if you don't have it, then it's hard to comprehend why you would like think that you're actually dying. But like for me, it was like, imagine like you're on a plane, as I'm on the plane today. Yeah. And imagine like the plane suddenly started plummeting, right? The fear of death would be like real, very right? Prominent. Like that's what that was. That's what I was feeling. I was feeling like I was on a plane that was plummeting into a building. Like that's how the fear was responding in my body from all the trauma. So yeah, that's what led to that realization of like, shit's got to start changing. You know, I'm carrying all this stuff. I'm webbing and lies and manipulation, and you know, so yeah, there's been a lot of rock bottoms, but I'm grateful for all of them.
And I think really powerful to hear you sit here and be able to explain it. And I know that, like we've connected before this, to know that like we can go there, because also it's like retelling it and reliving it, and you've dealt with it in a way where you're able to do that. And I think that it was really important when you said, one, it's showing up in your body. So like, guys, it will at some point, it's going to, no matter how big, how heavy. Mine was slightly different because it was like stress that I held in my body, but it still came out, and I was like, what do I do with it? Okay, great. Now I know, like, how do I make this different? Like, what do I do? But when you said it was about like that self-inquiry, and even now, if you have those thoughts, you know what to do with them. You know how to navigate that. I try not to say manage or control, because it's not like the energy I want us to bring to that.
It's go through it for me. It's like, I always say that, like, there's not this like other side that you get to, or it's like, me sitting here now, like, oh, I've just like made it, it's like, no, where I'm at in life is like, something's going to come through me, come at me, emotions, feelings, difficult times, temptations, impulsivities. And it's like, am I willing to go through it in a way that is like, like go through it in a way that is with presence, is with courage, that means that I'm going to come out of the other side and I'm going to know myself better, and there's going to be fuck ups and stuff along the way. But it's like, okay, when those feelings of anxiety come up, and I sometimes, still do get that, it's like, I'm like, okay, I'm feeling that, like checking in with the system, what's going on. And the first thing for me, it's like, forget the fucking story. It's like, what does the body need right now? Do I need to move? Do I need to cry? Do I need to speak it into existence and seek support from someone? And it's like, from that place, you build up that resilience to kind of keep going through things and going through things.
There's like two things there that I think are so incredibly important. One, in terms of the way that you communicate with yourself, is what I'm going to put it under, because you check in and say, what do I need? Right? Whether it's one, what does my body need physically, but also what do I need in this situation, and full permission that it can be different, right? I love that. So as much as I always talk about communicating, sometimes I think I probably don't emphasize enough that communicate with yourself and you'll know what you need. That doesn't mean that, like you said, you always have to speak to somebody, but actually, what does my body need? And even for me, like last weekend, I think I put it on my stories, and like I was just having a day where everything got too much, and I knew I was cramming in too much, and yet I was like in my fighting stage, which is rarer these days, but we know it's my default pattern, and the overwhelm kicked in. And in that situation, I needed to move my body. So I was like, we're going to the gym and we're going to go do something so I can completely like release this inside me. So one, I just thought that was really powerful in terms of the awareness again, but checking in, what do you need in that moment? Like, allow yourself for it to be different. And sometimes I think that we're looking for like a solution that's going to work for us all the time, but flex with it is the first thing I wanted to say. And then the second thing, when you say it's about going through it for you, I love it, because I actually hate the phrase feel the fear and do it anyway, because I really feel like it's about going through it. It's about allowing yourself to know that you are capable to hold space for it. So I was just really going to say that it also comes with learning how to trust yourself.
Yeah. And it's surrender as well. So it was like, I had for the first time, it was like 2 weeks ago, I like fully pivoted kind of. I'm in the tech world in the sense I work with a lot of people in the tech world. But I had a successful business consulting in tech, lucrative, good business, but it wasn't soul aligned for me anymore. And I was like, I'm going to pivot, and I'm going to really bring like all of this deeper work that I've done with men and women actually, but a lot with men on like retreats and trauma healing and shadow work. And I'm going to bring all of this knowledge of like people strategy, culture, leadership coaching, executives, and I'm going to put this together, and I'm going to create a new business out of that. But what happened in that process was the little boy who went in on non-school uniform day and had pretty shit clothes because his mum didn't have much money. Everyone else is wearing like fresh Air Force, and I'm like, oh, I'm feeling like a waste man basically. Like that little boy started kind of coming up and like, oh, but the money and like, is it going to be okay and whatever. And like, I kind of like, I felt really solid this past few years, I would say. It's been a solid pace for me. I found my rhythm and my groove in the stage of life and the chapter that I'm in. But I started feeling all of this anxiety come up, and I was like, oh, okay, what is this? So I was like trying to go through it. And then I thought, oh, I've kind of gone through it. And then the next day I just had like a big dip, and I really had like this must have been about a week ago now. I had like the first day that I'd felt probably in like definitely this year so far, where I'd like really dipped to that place, and it kind of felt a bit unfamiliar. And it was like, in that moment, what was it that I could do to go through it? And it was like, just surrender to it. It was like, it wasn't even about like, it was beyond like checking in with myself and doing the other things. It was like, I just need to lie here and feel the discomfort of this, and I'm anxious, and like, what do I need to, like, I actually don't know. So I'm just surrendered to whatever is. And it was like 24 hours just kind of moping a little bit, and it was able to pass through. So it's like you said, it's like, can we, when we get to that point where it just feels like you want to move on, it's like, can you just surrender that it may need to continue?
And it reminds me as well, in that space, when you said like, that wasn't about what do I need, that was beyond that. And I think this will make sense, I think, when we talk about your corporate career a little bit more, but it feels like in that moment, you tell me because you experienced it, not me, but that it was about you being. And when you said it was, you know, in that situation, it was 24 hours. So it's giving yourself that permission to sit in that discomfort. And it's horrible. I'm sorry, like, there's no way around that. But knowing exactly that was a moment for surrender. And that not every moment needs to be. And some moments will be way more practical. Sometimes I talk about as well having your like, your chatterboard is usually what I say. Like Ethan Cross talks about it in his book. But I think about it as like your board of directors for your life. So sometimes you'll have like a friend that you talk to about your business, or you'll have somebody that's your go-to person for a relationship. So think about your life as like you've got a board of directors, and sometimes in those situations it's helpful, and they're the people that help you zoom out. But there's also this side of it. And this side of it is sit with it and be with it. And like, I'm so sorry, it's horrible.
Yeah. Well, we also just like, we've created this culture and society where it's like holding on to things, getting things, consuming things, all of that kind of stuff. And I'm not sitting here saying I'm not part of that. Like, I've ordered as many Amazon parcels as the next brother. So it's like, so it's like that's the culture that we're in. But it's like, I'm a spiritual person. I believe we're all spiritual beings, but for me, I'm very devoted. Like, praying is a really important thing to me. So it's like, when I really need to surrender, or I don't know what to do. I wrote about this the other day, actually. It's like in leadership, when I'm doing something, I'm like, fuck, I don't really know where to go with this. I just pray, and that's how I surrender. I'm just like, whatever will happen will happen. Like, if you're going to give me the thing that is the right thing to say or to do, give it to me. If not, I'm happy to just stay here and not know, you know? So it's like, for me, that's how I surrender, you know. It's like, once I do that, everything's so much easier, because I spent so much time so like uptight, trying to control, trying to engineer, trying to manipulate everything. Because manipulate isn't necessarily, we've made it a negative word, but it's actually just like holding on and trying to like bend something to a will. And it's like, yeah, when you surrender, like, everything can just flow. And it's not that it's not difficult, but it's like, that's for me why praying is like, that's what I do when I need to surrender.
I'm smiling because you're like my second guest, where we've gone in terms of like the spiritual side, and you both literally quoted each other. So I'm smiling. If anyone's listened to the 2 episodes back to back, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. So I'm just going to leave that there, but I wanted to add it in. That's why I was smiling. And touching on in terms of manipulation, I really get it, because I talk a lot about in terms of it being like an unhealthy communication style. And you're right in terms of like the connotation of the word. And I say that usually if we're thinking about it in a negative way, yes, it's come from that place of control. And I was running a group session a couple of months ago, and it was in a corporate environment, and it was beautiful that this person could get there in the session. I was like, you are amazing, like, well done, because that was vulnerable. And we're talking about the unhealthy communication styles, and actually showing up, like, which ones are showing up for you the most at the moment within your work and within your team, right? How are we willing to do it differently to try and get to an assertive place, which is actually how you kicked off our episode. So, and for him, he was able to identify where he was manipulating. And for him, it came from such a space of trying to control, like, how he's viewed in the outcome and not wanting to feel rejected, which reminds me right back to your story around at school wanting to feel like you belong, which is such a basic human need for so many of us. So, and I always say that the flip side of like manipulation, if we're looking at it in a healthy way, is where you can influence. And if you can, because somebody as well said to me before, isn't manipulating and influence the same thing? And I'm like, no, I actually believe they're quite different, right? And your manipulation comes from like your scarcity.
I kind of wish I had a dictionary now. I don't know.
So I would say influencing is where you're able to appeal to somebody else's like motivations or what drives them when you're communicating.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
if you can appeal to that, you've adapted the way that you communicate, which is essentially, again, taking us right back to what you said at the beginning of this episode, to understand that you can get your message across in the way that the other person, you want them to hear it, but in a way that's going to land for them. That's how you influence another person. Manipulating is you're doing it from like the space that is negative, heavy,
Yeah.
controlling, and usually your fear space.
And often when I know if I think back to when I was like a real manipulator in those times, like scheming, you know, just trying to like get my shit all good, like it was about me. Really, the main person I was manipulating was myself. It was like constantly, and I actually see that pattern come up sometimes with like, you know, my choices that I make around like, oh, eating or exercise, and then I see like that manipulator come on like, nah bro, it's good, man, you just order that takeaway because you're going to do that big workout tomorrow. It's like manipulating and justifying and stuff like that. So it's like we all have that. It always comes back to the same thing. It's like awareness, you know.
I know, I think probably my most overused word. I'm probably going to make a list of like my 10 top overused words.
Amira's 10 top words.
Overused words that probably like my clients pick up on as well. But especially on the podcast. I don't think I could say the word awareness.
We need like we need a bloopers of you doing all the words. Yeah. Awareness.
They're like, yeah. Amira, we've got the message. Like, we got it. Okay. Before we talk about actually the work that you do now, because I really truly feel like it's so incredibly powerful, and I really hope and pray that this episode lands with so many people that I really want it to land in the way I want it to land. So selfish, trying to control.
Surrender.
Trust the universe that it's going to. But before we really get into that work, so I'd love to hear more about that, and it feels so healing and so deep. Let's take it back to your corporate life, because you've got some amazing, beautiful, cool tech, well-known companies that you've worked for, that you've been a part of, and I feel like you've got this beautiful blend. Probably why I'm drawn to your energy as well, in terms of like corporate and leadership, which I guess there's so much there that I can relate to. And then the side of the work, and I'm not trying to box you in, by the way, because it's really important when you said I've worked with men and women. But at the moment, I guess
that's like an ongoing thing. And it was like, when I started that business, I was like, I've worked with so many men, I'm going to work with men. And then like all these women started appearing, and the universe was saying like, oh, like work with women too. But I do a lot of men's work. It's an evolution.
We can evolve, that's fine. And I didn't want to box you in as well. I really relate to it. I'm not going to ad-lib on it. I just say I relate to it. Well, how would you, like, if I had to sum it up one word, 17-year-old version?
I was just lost. That's all. I was just lost. I was not in connection with myself. I was just like in complete separation outside of myself, like looking, searching, when really like what I needed to do was come back to this. But that's scary, right? So there's like all of those walls and all of those things that we put up, and then that was just playing out with the decisions I make. And ultimately, like, one of my biggest values and part of the reason I moved to Ibiza is community. It's like community is just like, it was my partner who was always going on about it before we moved to Ibiza, but it's just a fucking game changer when you really have community, like what it does, because that's the way that we're meant to live. And that's what I feel now that I was always looking for. So that's why I ended up in the wrong places, because I was like, oh, this is my community. But I was like, we're doing some bad shit.
That feels really powerful though, because in terms of like knowing that's your values, one of your values, and then seeing why, like now you can look back with compassion and understand then why you were wanting to fit into certain places or chase certain people or environments, because that's what you were seeking. And now this version of you can seek it in a healthy way. That's powerful.
Yeah.
Okay, so take us back to then, I was going to say, how you went from lost version, 17-year-old Jack, into the corporate world, to bossing it within like the leadership space.
Cool.
I've said that in the most slang East London way, but that's okay.
Oh, we're in South London. So got this apprenticeship, had no fucking idea what I was going to be doing. For so much of my life, you know, when you grow up and you've got like, people are really good at a musical instrument, they're really good at football, they're really good at whatever, you know, there's people who like find their gift. I never knew what mine was. Now I know what my gift is. My gift is people, and similar to you, it's like communication and like able to like attune myself to a person in like a deep way beyond just the words and all of that kind of stuff. And leadership is a byproduct of that, shall we say. So I got into this job, started working. What I didn't know is like it was kind of cool tech recruitment company, working with a lot of cool tech companies. Tech is a massive community. Like the world of tech, of like software engineering and all of this stuff, is like, the stereotype would be very like nerdy people, but it's like a very active community. So like I kind of came into that in my job, and I ended up running like tech communities and being involved in all this stuff. And through working in this recruitment agency, like kind of made a name for myself, being like a guy who did a certain area of tech and like was really good at it. And, you know, I became very successful in that company, but I was still like digging myself into a void because I still wasn't doing the work that I needed to do on myself. Alcohol, you know, my dad was a drug addict and an alcoholic, same thing. But that was starting to like, you know, that work hard, play hard, go on the holidays, you go to the Michelin star restaurants every month, all of that kind of stuff. So I was then getting into that, which was like adding another layer of disillusion about who I was. Long story short, I was very successful at it. And then Just Eat, who were one of my big clients at the time, who were like growing super, super fast, doing really well, were like, hey, come and do this for us internally. So that got me like into working in tech companies. And I was really good at what I did. Like what I essentially did was like recruiting and scaling companies. But when you do that, you then are like, it's the place where you spend the most time with people, right? And like you're hearing their emotions. How did they do in the interview? All of that kind of stuff comes up. So it was like, it's like being a therapist and a salesperson, all of that at the same time. So it kind of really honed my skills. And then I went to kind of, you know, I'm not going to go through every single one, but it was kind of like, I just caught a wave. I was really good at something, and I went from success story to success story. So I went to Just Eat. I grew really fast there, started managing a team and all of that stuff. Then I joined Monzo when they were like 90 people and they were like the big thing, and scaled the company to like 1,500 people, had a team of like 20, 30 people. And really over that time, it was just like, I started to realize that this was my gift. What I would say on reflection is like, probably the environment. Like I like working with people in that environment because I think it's important to like work with the system that we have, but actually like being in that environment, not that great for like my overall like mental health. And yeah. I mean, I'm sure you can relate to this. So, you know, hone my skills, continued growing, learned a lot of lessons along the way, mental health, burnout, all of that kind of stuff. And yeah, I guess at my peak, I got into kind of being like a head of people, VP of people, and designing like the culture and the strategy for all of these companies. So that was all happening. In parallel to that, you know, I had all this shit I was holding, and I was like, fuck. Like I also became a father at 23. So I'm like, that was a massive moment. I remember the first moment that I saw my daughter's eyes and I was like, oh, fuck, like I have something to live for. Because I didn't always feel, to be honest, like up until that point that I had something to live for. I just always felt like that kind of darkness, that void. So then that kind of triggered like, oh, I need to start doing some work on myself. And really like being a father at that age was like a rite of passage and initiation. So I'm like growing in the corporate world, becoming successful, learning skills, more money, more responsibility, whatever. And then I'm like, oh shit, I need to start sorting myself out. And then that kind of led me to men's work to heal myself. Just thinking that led to men's work, which was where I did a lot of my healing work. And then now I can talk more about this, but I've kind of like clammed it together. I can say why, but I'll pause there for a second because I was like going into yeah.
I loved it. You were so in flow. And I think it's really powerful hearing your journey because it gives so much context. And I know with all of us, I always say like we've got so many layers, but you have so much context in terms of like why you do what you do now and how you can. And I probably said this 3 times already within this episode, but it is powerful to hear you as a man be able to like get to this space where for me it feels authentic. So I was like, it's actually irrelevant. It's about how you feel, but I'm going to put my observation.
Yeah.
It feels authentic. And hearing as well how you went from like lost young version of you, like teenage version of you, to like VP, head of people. Like,
well, it was funny because when I worked in a bank, I remember I'd like be interviewing like leaders and stuff like that, and I'd come in and do interviews, and I'd, especially like Monzo, which was very text chilled, right, which was great for me. It's like bean bags, you wear what you want, whereas I'd been in agency recruitment that was like 3-piece suits and like hit the phones and make the money and how much money's on the board. So like tech was great for me because it allowed me to meet a lot of different people. It allowed me to kind of express myself more. But I always remember like walking into interviews with like people who would have come from like traditional banks who wanted to come and work at Monzo, where there's like, everyone's just like teenagers running a bank at that time. And I like bop in with like my hat backwards and like tattooed up, and they're looking at me like, who the fuck is this guy? But actually I would say in like my early corporate career, like all of that, the chip on my shoulder and like wanting to be successful was obviously like a driving force at getting me through and making me keep working so hard. But yeah, also like, I remember in my first job, like when I went to a first client meeting, I have a neck tattoo that I got when I was 16 and I had to put a plaster on it, which is just like, now I think about it, I'm just like, oh my God, I went to a meeting in bank with a fucking plaster on my neck tattoo. That's like the most ridiculous thing. But it was like, again, all of these kind of experiences, these reflections just sort of like forged me into this person. But what I was saying is it made people remember me. Because I remember going to an event once and someone making like a snide comment, oh, you're the guy with all the tattoos. But then so many people would remember me because I'd make an effort to get to know them about their life, their family, what were their names, and it's like really building relationships through great communication was like one of the key things that made me successful in all of those jobs, and not being afraid to be different, which was a process for me to like, now do the work I do and like feel and look the way I look, which is the way I want to look, but knowing that I'm trying to work with like a CEO who's expecting some dude to walk in with like a briefcase and a much more corporate style. But I think the corporate world kind of needs it, they need like a bit of freshness. So
I just smiling so much inside because yes to everything you said. I'm not necessarily here to agree, but this piece around, before we even get into like what the corporate like world needs, definitely some shake up. But when you talk about those snide comments and then actually how you realize like what your superpower is and like what you were being remembered for, and in a completely different way, I don't know how this is going to land, but I'm going to say it because it's my experience of it. But my hair was always something that I either hid or would like have in a certain way, because I'd get the snide remarks of like, you look unprofessional, For a lot of my corporate career, I was in like a really white environment as well. So I'd always stand out anyway, and I do everything in my power to like dull it down, blend in. And then it's like the things then that you become known for. And actually it's only in the recent years where I'm like, oh, I love it. And it's okay. Like, even it's taken ages for me to like be able to sit here and like not feel like it needs to be straight or blow dried. And it's a different thing, but it just reminds me when you talk about tattoos and like the snidey comments, and when you talk about what you do now and that you're able to like blend the two and what somebody might be expecting when you are working within that corporate world, I really get it, because definitely over the last year for me, probably like my corporate clients that I work with has increased a lot. And I think there's
you're working with like proper corporates, I think, as well, right?
And I think when I left that world, and it's not me cussing it, because I've got such an incredible experience, so many highs and lows. Like, it's not about whether it was good or bad. It doesn't work like that. But for a really long time, I was ready to be like, that chapter's closed. And actually, it's really empowering now to be able to realize I get to show up as me in a world where like I get to have an impact. What are you going to say? I feel like
no, it's just that what I'm seeing. So thank you for sharing that story with me, and respect to you. When you show up as yourself, like now when I do my job and like I'm working with a CEO who maybe, like I am a different style of coach than they may have expected, maybe on appearance or whatever, or just like some of the ways that I work, because I'm trying to like really break boundaries or whatever. I'm not saying other coaches aren't doing that, but like the more that you're yourself, the more that you show up with your hair in its full bloom, with your tattoos out, with the clothes that you like to wear, the more that you say the things that are really true for you, the more impact you have on the people that you work with. And also that vibration pulls the right people in to work with you. Because I know that you run some corporate workshops, and I've got no doubt that people come in like, okay, it's one of those corporate workshops, and they leave and they're like questioning life, like, oh my God, like, do you know what I mean? And it's like, that's because you're bringing your true self. It probably, for me, I speak for myself, it doesn't mean for me that I'm not adjusting my communication and being the bridge, because it's like the amazing thing for me is I can work with a tech CEO because I speak their language. So I always say, and I can maybe loop back on how I molded the business that I have now, which I think would be useful as a piece of wisdom. But it's like, yeah, when you I completely lost my train of thought. That's okay.
That's okay, because I was going to say anyway, bring it back to actually, because I know we keep touching on it and then we haven't gone there yet. So I was going to say anyway, tell us more about how it's molded together.
I've got the point that I just missed.
I love
it's
it.
Like it's like a Trojan horse, right?
Yeah.
So like they come to you. So this is my projection of you, so it may not be true, but also for me it's like they come to me because they see the tech companies and like the background, and they're like, this guy's going to make me like the best CEO ever, or the best leader, or whatever it is. But it's somewhat of a Trojan horse, because really I'm going to make them a better person. And it's not all this like the stuff, we're not just going to talk about business and all of that, we're going to get into life and the things that are really blocking them. And I kind of feel that with you in a way, or like that's my projection, so you can tell me if it's true. But it's like, communication, background in corporate, like knows her stuff's got a lot of great stuff out there. But it's like, then when you come on, what you're really bringing is like your true self and like the spiritual principles and the reflections and all of that. And it's like, if you can be the bridge between that and the corporate world, then I think that's a really powerful way to work with the system. Does that land?
For the protection. Like spot on. And it's beautiful that you describe it as a bridge, because I think only recently, within the last year, have I really been able to sit with it and be like, how beautiful is it, Amira, that you get to do both? Like, how beautiful that you can, and there's really similar to you, like there's a lot of reasons why I can flex with both, and it's not just because I've worked in the corporate world. It's so much more. When you talk about, I was smiling so deeply. I feel like I'm just basically reiterating everything you're saying.
Yeah.
But when you said you figured out that your skill was people, and that for so long, like you're like, I wasn't good at a musical instrument, or I didn't have like a gift. I remember I used to literally go home and pray and be like, God, please make me good at something.
Yeah. You just feel like an average, and you're just like, oh.
I was like, I'm not technically, like I went and I studied law. I actually loved it. Like my fun fact is I qualified, and like I loved it. I absolutely loved it. My goal behind it is, and I only knew this later in life, it's because I wanted to help people. I wanted to support kids going through care. So that came from my space of helping. That came from my space of people. I didn't know that at the time. But I also went to do it because I wanted a technical job, because I thought like technical makes me good. And I wasn't able to then tap into mine's exact same as yours. That is people. And I remember as well, like I sat in a interview with like one of my first CEOs, and I was like, I'm good with people. But at the time I actually didn't even own it. And I said, yeah, like, so what? It's the way that I was made. And I was like, so what? And it's actually when you tap into your superpower, like, it's incredible. I really, really went off on a tangent. There were so many other things I was going to add. I was like,
I can bring us back, because like on the story, I want to kind of say this process I went through, because I feel like it will be valuable, and we keep like kind of touching it. Is like, I had this successful career. I left Monzo. I set up my own people consulting business. Actually, with my fiance, we met at Monzo. So shout out Monzo. That was a good win from that. And
I also almost applied for a job at Monzo, so I feel like our paths weren't meant to cross until now.
Well, I could have been running recruitment there, so you were probably like, one of my team was looking at your CV.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Anyway, sorry, fun fact, side note.
Yeah, there you go. So set up my consultancy, had that for 3.5 years. Also ran a leadership accelerator for people in tech companies that put like 100 people through in a year, which was successful. And then I moved to Ibiza in September last year, and I was like making good money. Again, the story like was definitely attached to the reputation that I had and what I had built and the LinkedIn following and all of that kind of stuff. But I just had to get honest with myself, and the universe was showing me through like the projects I was doing. I was like then working with like really toxic people on some of the projects who were like, didn't know they were going to be toxic, turned out really toxic. It's like the universe was like, yes, you're really good at going in and setting up the people and the culture and the systems and the strategy and building the team and all of that. But like, you don't love that. You don't love that. And what you love doing is doing deep transformational work with people so they can be a leader in all different areas of their life. And obviously I've been on this men's work journey I haven't spoke too much about, with Sacred Sons and leading retreats and working with men and doing all of this. And I was like, okay, so I've got corporate world here, and I've got like this stuff there. And it took me like 6 months to be willing to surrender and to be like, I got to start letting some of this stuff go and I need to do something new. And then it came to me one day and I was like, oh my God, where are the most like, a lot of the most like repressed, struggling, like need to do some deeper work people? And I was like, oh my God, they're in the corporate world. And I was like, boom, boom. And it was like this convergence where I was just like, yes, okay, I can go and work with people and I can do the business stuff. I can speak their language. I can work with entrepreneurs, people who are making an impact, but I can work with them on a deeper level. Because it's like when you do that deeper work and you make those shifts, like that's what I saw. It was like the more I started to do that, why did I get more successful? Why did I become a better leader? Because I was willing to fucking look at myself and be like, okay, here's what you need to work on, you know, and moving things out the way and creating more space and regulating myself. So yeah, I think it's just a message for anyone that's like, it can be really hard to let go of things, especially when it comes to that space of career. And it's like, just, we don't often give ourselves the time. We just keep going to the next thing. But like for me, going to Ibiza and detaching from all the invoices and the money that the scared little boys still wanted and all of these things, and just being like, I'm just going to sit with this. I'm going to surrender. It's going to come. Yeah, business bank account balance is going down. I'm spending that money because I'm not changing my lifestyle. And then it's like now, you know, I've been on my pivot for maybe like 3 months and it's like, wow, like I'm fucking aligned. Like the people who I want to kind of take this frequency that I'm putting out, like they're coming, the right CEOs, the right leaders, the right entrepreneurs. So it's like that piece around like surrender, and often with this thing around separation, we don't believe that things can exist together. Like it's like, oh well, that corporate stuff, it can't exist with this. I'm doing like men's work, I'm drumming, I'm chanting, I'm doing ceremonies, I'm like half naked running around with men in the woods. This can't live in the corporate world. And it's like now I'm doing some of that kind of work. We're not naked in the office or anything. I'm doing that kind of work, but I'm doing it in organizations as well. So it's like everything can exist together. Don't create limitations within your life and separations. This whole shit when people are like, my work life, I love my work-life balance. I'm like, if you have a work-life balance, that's the problem. Like, fuck that separation, because we never had it in the past. That's not how we're meant to live as humans. We're meant to build together. We're meant to be in community together. Like, work and life are the same thing. Sorry, I got really passionate there.
I am so here for the passion. And it just, when you're talking about that as well, and like letting go of the separation and bringing it together and things existing within the same space. And I talk a lot around like duality, because I just think, yes, we go in with like, I've got to keep this here, I've got to keep that here. Also as well goes back to why so many, I feel like it's such a big topic at the moment within corporates as well, but why we feel like we can't be authentic at work, or why we can't speak up and communicate. But actually it's this whole separation. I had an amazing challenge this week where somebody was like, why the hell am I going to bother bringing my insecurities to work? And I was like, oof. Okay, we need to break that down.
Yeah. But it's also like, I say this to organizations because they get worried sometimes, like, and when I do talks around like vulnerability and stuff, like everyone's just going to be coming in like crying and it's like, for me, vulnerability isn't just dumping my shit and being like, this happened to me, like, ugh, you know, when I'm being vulnerable, it's like I'm sharing this because there's an intention and there's a purpose that if I can share this in this way, not only is it healing for me or useful for me, but it's also productive for these people listening. It's going to inspire them. It's going to influence them in a positive way. It's going to give them permission to do the same thing and also feel free of whatever it is that they might be holding. So vulnerability for me, it's like productive vulnerability. Whereas that's what people get stuck in. They're like, I'm not just going to bring my insecurities to work. Like, yeah, cool, sure. We need like, I don't want to say boundaries necessarily, but we need like containers of like, here's what we're here to do, and this is what makes sense to make the container productive.
I like that.
But there's still like a lot of people that are just like complete separation. And I don't know, you know, this is what I found in my life. That separation of doing the corporate stuff, running men's retreats, going and doing all this like incredible deep healing work, leading groups of men, whatever it was. And I just felt like I was being pulled apart. I was just like, oh my God, I can't do this anymore. And it's like, that's where I feel like these like later life or midlife crises happen, because we're just getting pulled apart. And then you got men often who are like, I'm going to buy a convertible car. I actually did buy a convertible car. Maybe I had a crisis. I sold it now. But who are like, what am I doing? What is this all for? So it's like, the more we can come into connection with the different parts of our lives, the more that we're not going to feel that pull, and the more that we're going to be on purpose, the more that we're going to be in our vision, whatever that is. So
I don't really want to add on anything on that. Okay, what I'm going to go back to, but I literally, because sometimes I just want the point to land, and I think it's so powerful hearing it from you, not from me. Keep ad-libbing on everything. So going back to where you felt pulled, and now very recently in the last few months, you found a way of pivoting and bringing them together. Share with us a little bit more around Sacred Sons, your retreat work. Like, what does that look like? How have you been able to step into what feels like your space of alignment? Because I think we've got a really good handle on the leadership and your corporate world and why you can boss it. What about the other side of it?
Yeah, so my journey with Sacred Sons was, I said to you earlier, like I had this curiosity around what it meant to be a man. And it was like, my lady went on this, my lady, like, she's been deep. She's a meditation teacher, deep in Vipassana, plant medicines. I met her and I was like, oh my God, she's a guru. That's why I said to my mum, I was like, Mum, I've met a spiritual guru. And I was like, so in love with her, I'm not so in love with her. I am so in love with her, but she's just an inspiration to me and has really like opened me up a lot to some of this stuff and showed me the way. And I was really, she went on a women's retreat, kind of doing similar work, and she came back. And I was like, something's different about her. It's like just energetically, I could feel it. And then I was like, oh, there must be something out there like this for men. And I hadn't really done any work on healing around my masculinity and stuff. Sacred Sons was very much a US organization at the time. And basically, I found that Instagram, you got all these bros like screaming and crying. The thing that really drew me into that was also that they were men of all different colors, all different, like you could see it was like the way I grew up, very multicultural, and like it wasn't one type of man. Whereas some of the other ones I'd found was just white men, and I just like representatively, I was drawn to something that looks like how I grew up, right? And I went out to Maui, Hawaii, and did a retreat with their founders as a participant, and it just fucking blew me wide open. Like I was seeing how through like physical, relational, emotional, confrontational work, men coming together and sharing and doing intense stuff together, and like also celebrating their masculinity and being men together, it just like fucking blew me wide open. And good timing, they wanted to come and start working in Europe, and like they obviously saw like, oh, this guy, he's into this work and he also has a lot of leadership experience. Again, can those two come together? And it was like, yeah, very quickly I became, someone leading and facilitating within Sacred Sons. And really what it's about, it's a remembrance of something that's been going on for thousands and thousands of years. The same way women have done this, but men have gathered around the fire. They've gone hunting together, all of these kind of things. And we've forgotten that in our culture. And men really need that. Men need to be in spaces together where they're held accountable, where they're challenged, because there's, why do we think we got all this fucking abuse and shit going on in homes? Because a lot of men aren't being challenged or channeling that energy or those emotions. And then it's coming out fucking sideways. I mean, there's so many things we could talk about with men. So like the whole idea of men's work and the work I do with Sacred Sons, and then also now other retreats that I do myself and mixed retreats, is getting into your body, working out like what's not in alignment, where is the trauma, what needs healing, and how can you do that in connection with yourself and connection with in other people. Really the way it's described, or I would describe it as well, is it's training. So it's not like, oh, I'm going on a retreat, I'm just going to like really zen out. Yeah, there is elements of that at times, but actually it's like, are you ready to train physically, emotionally? Are you ready to be called in and confronted by other men, and are you ready to celebrate other men? Because so often in this world, and this was a lot of what it was like, why was I manipulating so much? Because everything society told me about men was that we're meant to be in competition with each other, that we're meant to destroy, we're meant to dominate, all of that. And that's not actually what masculinity is. Masculinity and being in your I prefer balanced masculinity now than healthy masculinity, is actually supporting other men. It's being of service to women, to children. It's coming into connection again, like I said, with yourself. But yeah, the work is just, I've ran and led retreats where I've got like a FTSE 100 CEO type guy. I've got a dude who lives in like a tent somewhere. I've got a dude who's just come out of jail, got a stay-at-home dad. And like all these men, you would just think they were so different. But the reality is we are all going through the same fucking shit. And it's the same now when I've done mixed groups. It's like the women as well. So it's like, we need to come together in these ways with intention. We need to process our emotions. We need to fucking grieve. Like, we don't fucking grieve in this culture. So we need to come together and we need to grieve, and we need to train, especially when it's men coming together. We need to train and we need to sharpen our skills so that when we come out here, we can be a positive force. We can be a danger if we need to be, but not dangerous, is something that a guy, Trevor Boehm, says that I really like. So that's what to me about doing this work is. And yeah, it's just moved so much in me. Like, even when I'm doing it, you know, and men are stepping in the center and we're doing these deep shadow work, these processes on them, there's release, all of these things. It's like, it's just channeling through me, and so much stuff is being put back together at the same time. So for me, it's just, you know, the deepest thing that I could have ever prayed for would be to have this community, this brotherhood. There's an epidemic right now of men's friendship. Men just don't really have friends, like real friends, men that they can lean on, a lot of men. So that's what it's there for. It's there to make men better.
I absolutely.
You want to come, right?
Can I? I'll come.
But then
I was like, will you let me in?
The thing I want to say is, like, all of it is necessary. All of it is welcome. Women need women's spaces. They need to heal. They need to do work together, all of that kind of stuff. Men needs men's spaces, and we need spaces where we come together. But really, like, when I go into one of these retreats, it's like going back thousands of years in the way that we would have lived when it was a village, you know, when we went in these big cities where it's so individual. It's like, we're all supporting each other. We're all doing the work together. No one's better than anyone else. If something comes up, you know, we're like clearing it. Oh, there's a charge or a trigger. Great. Call this person in. Let's have a conversation. It's hard. What do we need to do here? How do we need to move through this? And for me, it's like, oh my gosh, when I'm in those spaces, I'm like, if we can take this and amplify it to a global scale, like, that's the shit that's going to change the world. It's individual work that people do, and it creates a collective shift. So that's what I'm here for. Word.
I literally need to leave us on that note, because that is so powerful. I feel like if we can get to that space, that is like the sweet spot of where we're at, like, as a collective. As much as I could deep dive with you for probably another hour, I am going to say we can do a part 2, because I feel like there's so much more in terms of like the work as well that you do with not just Sacred Sons, but within that men's space that's going to help and add value to so many people. Before we wrap up, I always ask every single guest 3 questions. It can be anything we've spoken about before. It can be something new, whatever you fancy. So first question, what's some food for thought or your favorite quote, whether you feel called to share, that you want to leave our lovely listeners with?
There's a saying, a Native American Lakota saying, which is, I might not have it word for word, and respect to the people that brought this wisdom, this knowledge, which is, the longest journey in life we can make is from the head to the heart. And that for me just sums up, it makes me feel emotional actually saying it. It's like, that for me, that is what life is about. It's like, how can you live a life of integrity within your heart? How can you take ownership? And it's like, whenever I feel out of alignment, whenever I feel lost, whenever I feel alone, whenever I feel that shit's getting on top of me and I'm overwhelmed and I don't know what to do, it's like, how can I come back to the heart? Because usually it means I've gone into my head, and like, the head was creating for analyzing fear and risk and all of these things, and amazing, it has a purpose. But the heart is where we lead from, that intuition, that like, that love. So yeah, that would be and yeah, thank you to the people who brought that.
Beautiful. What would be your practical tip?
Process your fucking emotions.
I love it. That was
just
so
process
real.
your fucking emotions, like, with your body. So like, I didn't get into this with the Sacred Sons work, but the reason I love that work so much, and thank you to my amazing teachers who have developed me in Sacred Sons, who have given me these opportunities to lead this work as well, and now do it in my own way. But process your fucking emotions. Like, if you are feeling anger, do you need to go and hit a pillow? Maybe it feels ridiculous. Move the energy through your body. If you're feeling sad and you need to grieve, how can you cry? How can you grieve with someone else? What do you need to do to process that emotion? If you're feeling anxiety, like, every time I feel like a more intense emotion coming in, I just stop as soon as I can. Like, obviously sometimes I'm in a conversation or whatever it is, but stop and just feel the emotion. Like, don't bypass that point. Don't just go on to the next thing or whatever. Or if you have to for some reason, come back and feel it later. Process your fucking emotions. Yeah.
It's a quote of the episode.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then last but not least, a resource that you want to share. It can be absolutely anything, either one of your favorites, one that's helped you, book, film, podcast, whatever it is.
It would have to be Sacred Sons, you know, like for the men who are listening. I just think every man deserves an opportunity to experience that work and see what it can do for his life and the people around him. So you can Google them or Instagram them. They also have an amazing podcast. It's not just for men, but Adam, who again has been a mentor to me, who is the podcast host for that. Like, there's just so many amazing nuggets in there. And that was before I went to a retreat. That was kind of what I started listening to. And it's like the amazing thing I love about this form and being part of it is like we have this conversation and it's just, it could be the tiniest thing. Maybe you half listen to the episode, but that's what Sacred Sons, the podcast, did for me and the work that they do. So they would be the resource that I'd offer for the men. That's all I got.
I really like that because I feel that it ties in, one, to everything we've spoken about, but two, I love that if any part of our conversation has resonated with somebody and they're like, right, where do I go from here? They've got a resource. So that's a beautiful one. I don't know as well if I've had that many like male focused resources. So thank you. I want to say I'm so grateful for our conversation, your time, and for catching a flight from Ibiza.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.